Hello, my friends, and welcome back to Streamline English. I hope you are having a wonderful day. Get comfortable and take a slow breath in and out. Tonight, we travel back more than 2,500 years to one of the greatest empires in all of human history. You don't need to understand every word, just listen and follow the story with me. Have you ever stopped to think about where the idea of human rights comes from? Today we use that phrase often, the idea that every human being has fundamental rights and dignities that must be respected, regardless of who they are or where they come from. Most people think of this as a modern idea, born in the Enlightenment of the 18th century, or written into modern constitutions after the great wars of the 20th century. But here is something remarkable. More than 2,500 years ago, in the ancient world of the Middle East, a great king created what some historians call the first human rights document ever written. He proclaimed that people should be free to worship as they chose, that conquered peoples should not be forced to abandon their customs or their gods, that enslaved people should be returned to their homelands. He put these ideas in writing, on a clay cylinder that you can still see today, in a museum in London. This king ruled the largest empire that had yet existed in the ancient world, an empire that stretched from the Aegean Sea in the west to the borders of India in the east. And this empire was, for its time, one of the most tolerant, sophisticated, and well-organized in all of history. His name was Cyrus. His empire was the Persian Empire, and this is its story. If you enjoy learning English through epic history like this, please subscribe to Streamline English. It really helps our little channel grow. Thank you, my friend. To understand the Persian Empire, you first need to understand the world in which it arose, about 2,500 years ago. The ancient Middle East, the region we now call the Middle East and Central Asia, was, at that time, a world of many different peoples, cultures, languages, and religions. There were Babylonians, Assyrians, Medes, Elamites, Lydians, Egyptians, Hebrews, and many, many more. Each had their own traditions, their own gods, their own way of life, and many of them had, at various times, been conquered or absorbed by other empires, which had often tried to impose their own culture and religion on the peoples they ruled. The dominant power in the region before the rise of Persia had been the great empires of Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, in what is now Iraq. Mesopotamia means land between the rivers. This region was one of the earliest cradles of human civilization, where writing, agriculture, and city life first developed thousands of years ago. The Babylonian and Assyrian empires had dominated the region for centuries, often ruling through fear and the forced displacement of conquered peoples. And then, from the highlands to the east, from the mountains of what is now the country of Iran, came a new power, a people called the Persians, and their great king would change the way empires worked. The founder of the Persian Empire was a man named Cyrus. History would call him Cyrus the Great, and his life story, though much of it comes from later accounts that may be embellished, is one of the great rise from obscurity to greatness stories of the ancient world. According to the traditions about him, Cyrus was born into the royal family of a small Persian kingdom, but as a young man he was sent away from court. Some accounts describe him as having spent time among ordinary people, shepherds and farmers, before he rose to power. Whether the stories are literally true or not, they capture something real about the man. He was not a typical king. He had a connection to ordinary people and a practical wisdom that set him apart from the rulers of his time. When Cyrus came to power as king of the Persians, he began a series of military campaigns of extraordinary success. One by one, the great powers of his world fell before him. He conquered the powerful Median Empire, which had been the dominant power in the region. He conquered the wealthy kingdom of Lydia in what is now western Turkey. He conquered Babylonia, the great Babylonian Empire, one of the most powerful in the ancient world. And then came the moment that would define his legacy forever. When Cyrus entered the great city of Babylon, a magnificent metropolis, one of the wonders of the ancient world, he did something that the conquered peoples had not expected. Instead of destroying the city, instead of imposing his own religion and culture by force, instead of enslaving or killing the people, he did the opposite. He declared that the people of Babylon would be free to practice their own religion and follow their own customs. He declared that enslaved or exiled peoples, people who had been forced away from their homelands, should be allowed to return home. He declared that the many peoples of his empire would be free to worship their own gods without interference. Exiled means forced to leave one's home country or homeland, often as a punishment or by the force of a conqueror. These declarations were written down on a small clay cylinder, shaped like a rolling pin, covered in the tiny wedge-shaped marks of the ancient cuneiform writing system, cuneiform being the earliest form of writing, developed in Mesopotamia, made by pressing a reed into wet clay. This cylinder, the Cyrus cylinder, was buried in the walls of Babylon, and it was discovered by archaeologists in 1879. Today, it is kept in the British Museum in London. Is it really the world's first human rights document? Historians debate this. Some argue that calling it that is a modern projection, putting modern ideas onto an ancient text. Others point out that Cyrus's motives were probably partly practical, as well as principled. Tolerating local religions made conquered peoples easier to govern. But even with these qualifications, the text is remarkable. In an ancient world where conquerors routinely forced their religion and culture on conquered peoples, Cyrus chose a different path, and that choice shaped his empire and his legacy for centuries. The Jewish people of the Bible, who had been held captive in Babylon, called him their liberator. He is, remarkably, mentioned in the Hebrew Bible in positive terms, as a king who set God's people free. He is the only non-Jewish figure in the Hebrew Bible described as an anointed leader, one chosen by God. That tells you how radical and memorable his tolerant approach was, even to the peoples who experienced it. Cyrus's policy of tolerance was not just a one-time gesture. It became the organizing principle of the Persian Empire, and it was continued by his successors. The Persian Empire, at its height, was the largest empire the ancient world had yet seen. It stretched from Greece and Egypt in the west to Central Asia and the borders of India in the east, an empire of dozens of different peoples, speaking dozens of different languages, following dozens of different religions. No empire before it had ever tried to govern such diversity, and the Persian solution was remarkable. Let the people be who they are. Unlike earlier empires that had tried to impose one culture on everyone, the Persians allowed the peoples they ruled to keep their own languages, religions, laws, and customs. Local governors, called satraps, each governing a region called a satrapy, often came from local noble families, not just from Persia itself. Conquered peoples could rise to high positions in the Persian administration. Local temples and religious sites were respected, not destroyed. This system was not perfect, and it was not without its tensions and violence. Rebellions were suppressed, sometimes harshly. Not every province was always treated generously, and the empire was still, ultimately, a monarchy in which the king's word was law. But compared to what had come before, and what would come in some places afterward, the Persian approach to governing a diverse empire was genuinely unusual, and in many ways admirable. The result was an empire that was, in many ways, astonishingly stable and prosperous for the people who lived in it. Like the Inca much later in South America, the Persians understood that an empire is only as strong as its communications, and so they built something remarkable: the Royal Road. The Royal Road was a great highway, thousands of miles long, that stretched from the western edge of the empire to the eastern heartland, through what are now Turkey, Iraq, and Iran. Along this road, at regular intervals, were relay stations, where fresh horses and riders waited. Messages and royal dispatches could travel the full length of the road, a journey that would take an ordinary traveler many weeks on foot, in just a matter of days, by this relay system of riders changing horses at each station. This network is sometimes called the world's first postal system, a system for carrying messages and packages across great distances. The Greek historian Herodotus wrote admiringly of these Persian messengers, saying that neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor darkness would keep them from completing their duty with speed. These words, written about Persian messengers more than 2,500 years ago, would later be adopted as the motto of the United States Postal Service, a beautiful echo across the centuries. The road and its messengers allowed the king to govern his vast empire efficiently, receiving news from distant provinces and sending orders back. They also facilitated trade, bringing merchants and goods from across the known world into contact with one another, enriching both the empire and the peoples within it. The Persian Empire lasted for about 200 years, from the conquests of Cyrus in the 6th century BC to its fall to Alexander the Great of Macedon in the 4th century BC, the same Alexander whose story we told in a previous episode. When Alexander conquered Persia, he was, in a sense, paying it the ultimate compliment. He was so impressed by the Persian model of governing a diverse empire that he adopted much of it himself. He wore Persian dress, observed Persian customs, and tried to govern his own vast empire with some of the same tolerant, inclusive approach that had made the Persian Empire work. Persia shaped Alexander even as Alexander destroyed it, and Persia's influence did not end there. The Persian language, Persian art and architecture, Persian religious ideas, and the Persian model of administration left deep marks on the cultures of the Middle East, Central Asia, and beyond. Persian culture and civilization remained enormously influential for centuries after the Achaemenid dynasty ended, shaping later empires and kingdoms that followed. And the Cyrus cylinder itself, dug up from the ruins of Babylon more than 2,000 years after it was buried, has become one of the most famous ancient artifacts in the world, a symbol of an ancient vision of tolerance and human dignity that the modern world still aspires to. The story of the Persian Empire teaches us something both practical and profound, that tolerance works. The Persians built the largest empire of their age, and they held it together not primarily through fear and force, but through a policy of letting people be who they are. They understood, more than 2,000 years before most governments in history would catch up, that a diverse society is stronger when its diversity is respected, not crushed. This does not mean the Persian Empire was a paradise, or that every ruler was wise and kind, but its core insight, that you can govern people of many different cultures and religions better by respecting them than by crushing them, was genuinely ahead of its time. The greatest empires in history have often been those that understood how to hold many different peoples together, not by making everyone the same, but by giving everyone room to be themselves. So tonight, before you rest, a thought to carry with you. The Persian Empire was a world of many languages, many peoples, and many traditions, all living within one great structure that, at its best, respected their differences. And in that way, it offers us a very early glimpse of something we still work toward today, a world where many different kinds of people can live together, with their differences respected. Your journey with English is something like this too. Learning another language is, in a deep sense, an act of reaching toward another culture, of saying, I want to understand you. I want to enter your world. Every language you learn adds a new voice to the beautiful, complicated mix of who you are. And the world becomes, a little at a time, more like the tolerant, connected world that the best human beings have always dreamed of. Keep reaching toward other worlds, my friend. It is one of the finest things a human being can do. If this story amazed you, please give it a like and subscribe to Streamline English. It truly helps us grow. And tell me in the comments, which ancient empire or civilization would you like me to tell you about next? Until next time, my friend, keep opening doors and have a wonderful day.